Deep in the swamps of Louisiana sits a prison larger than Manhattan, a place where men live, work, fight, and die, most never to walk free again. This is Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States. Once a slave plantation, now a modern-day penitentiary, its history is written in blood, sweat, and unbroken chains. Tonight, we expose life and death inside Angola Prison. To understand Angola, you have to go back to its roots. Long before the word prison was stamped on its gates, this land carried another name, the Angola Plantation. Thousands of enslaved Africans were forced to work its vast cotton fields under brutal overseers. When slavery ended in 1865, the land didn't change hands, it changed systems. What was once slavery became convict leasing, a practice where mostly black men were leased from jails to work the very same soil their ancestors had toiled on. Angola's past and present are bound together by chains, both literal and historical. By the late 19th century, Louisiana's prison system was a scandal. The state outsourced inmates to private businessmen who ran Angola as a labor camp. Prisoners were beaten, starved, and worked to death. The death rate was staggering, sometimes reaching 20% per year. Newspapers called Angola the bloodiest prison in America. When Louisiana officially purchased the land in 1901, Angola became the Louisiana State Penitentiary. But the cruelty didn't end. The prison was built on a simple formula. Men would labor in the fields from sunup to sundown, watched over by armed guards on horseback. That formula has barely changed. Even today, Angola operates its own farm system, producing millions of pounds of crops and livestock every year, sold for profit by the state. For the 5,000 men inside, most serving life without parole, the irony is crushing. They work the same fields where enslaved people once bent the earbacks. Angola is more than a prison. It is a reminder that the shadow of slavery never fully disappeared. The prison covers 18,000 acres, making it the largest maximum security prison in the U.S., larger than Manhattan, larger than the city of San Francisco. It's not just a prison, but a self-contained city. Angola has its own zip code, its own fire department, its own churches, schools, and even a prison rodeo. Yet beneath this strange self-sufficiency lies a brutal truth. Most who enter Angola will never leave alive. In 1971, a federal judge compared conditions inside Angola to a medieval dungeon. Prisoners lived in overcrowded, filthy dormitories, where violence was a daily reality. Inmates described beatings, stabbings, and rampant abuse by guards. Lawsuits piled up, but reforms came slowly. The name Angola became synonymous with suffering and hopelessness. And still, Angola is not just about confinement, it is about finality. Over 80% of Angola's prisoners are serving life sentences, many without parole. For them, Angola is the last chapter of life. The state even runs a prison hospice program, where inmates care for fellow prisoners as they die. Wooden coffins are built by hand in Angola's carpentry shop, and funerals take place inside the prison cemetery known grimly as Point Lookout. The journey from slave plantation to prison empire has shaped Angola into something more than an institution. It is a machine, one designed to control, to punish, and to extract labor from the bodies of men who will never be free. But what is it really like to live inside this machine? What does a day inside Angola feel like, for the inmates, for the guards, and for the world watching from beyond the gates? The truth begins not in the fields, but in the cell blocks, where the echoes of Angola's violent past still haunt the present. When dawn breaks over Angola, the routine begins. A loudspeaker cracks to life, guards bang on doors, and the men are ordered up from their bunks. For most of Angola's 5,000 inmates, there is no such thing as sleeping in. This is a prison that runs like a factory, and time waits for no one. By 5 a.m., the cell blocks hum with activity. Inmates shuffle in line for breakfast, usually a simple tray of grits, powdered eggs, and cornbread. There is no choice, no menu, and little variety. Former prisoners have described meals as barely edible, with stories of spoiled milk, undercooked beans, and stale bread. Yet food is not about pleasure here. It is about fuel. The body is fed just enough to keep it working. After breakfast comes the work call. For thousands, this means heading to the fields, a sight that has shocked human rights observers for decades. Rows of men, mostly black, mostly serving life, march out under the hot Louisiana sun. Dressed in prison denim, they spread across acres of farmland, hoeing, planting, and harvesting. Above them, mounted guards on horseback watch with rifles strapped across their shoulders. The image is chilling, like a photograph pulled from the 19th century, but it is Angola in the 21st. The prison farm produces crops like soybeans, corn, and wheat. Angola also raises cattle and catfish, generating millions of dollars in food supplies each year. The Louisiana Department of Corrections insists this is rehabilitation, teaching inmates discipline and skills. But critics argue it is forced labor, modern slavery hiding behind prison walls. Inmates earn as little as 2 cents an hour, and many of them will die here before ever spending a single free dollar. Not all work at Angola is in the fields. Some inmates are assigned to carpentry shops making furniture. Others labor in kitchens, laundry rooms, or maintenance crews. Angola even has a license. E-Plate Factory, churning out the plates that cover cars across Louisiana. Work is not optional. Those who refuse can face punishment, from solitary confinement to losing visitation rights. When the workday ends, prisoners return to their units, where life is no less harsh. Dormitories often house dozens of men in cramped, noisy spaces. Privacy is non-existent. Rows of bunks, stacked side by side, with only a footlocker for personal belongings. The air is heavy, thick with sweat in the humid summer months. In winter, the draft cuts through cracked windows. Fights are common. Tension simmers constantly, fueled by debt, gang ties, or simply the pressure of life without freedom. Angola has a reputation for violence stretching back decades. In the 1950s and 60s, stabbings and assaults were so frequent that the prison earned the nickname the bloodiest prison in America. While reforms and lawsuits have brought some improvements, the threat of violence remains. Inmates describe learning survival as their first lesson. Never show weakness, never trust too easily, and always watch your back. And yet, amidst the struggle, a kind of community forms. Angola has chapels where men gather to worship. It has sports fields, where softball and basketball games break up the monotony of prison life. The most infamous tradition is the Angola Prison Rodeo, a bizarre spectacle where inmates ride bulls and broncos before cheering crowds from the outside world. Critics call it exploitation, while some inmates see it as the only chance for adrenaline and applause they will ever get. But the deeper truth of Angola's daily life lies in its finality. For many inmates, there is no countdown to freedom. More than 80% are serving life without parole. Time here does not move toward release. It moves toward death. Angola even prepares for this reality with a hospice program. Prisoners themselves serve as caregivers, sitting at the bedsides of dying men, holding their hands, bathing them, and eventually burying them in handmade coffins. It is one of the few places in America where men are born free, live enslaved by the system, and die behind the same barbed wire. Correctional officers, too, live this reality in their own way. For them, Angola is not just a workplace, but a world of contradictions. Some officers see their role as maintaining order in a place where chaos could erupt at any moment. Others struggle with the moral weight of guarding men who will never leave. And then there is the unspoken truth. In rural Louisiana, Angola is one of the region's biggest employers. Entire families depend on the prison for their livelihoods. It is not just a prison. It is the economic heart of a community. The daily rhythm of Angola is unforgiving. Wake up, eat, work, return, repeat. Day after day, year after year. For some, that rhythm lasts decades. For others, it lasts until their body gives out. Angola is not simply a prison sentence. For most, it is a life sentence, whether or not the courts called it that. Yet even in such a place, stories of resistance, resilience, and small glimmers of humanity emerge. Men who teach each other to read. Inmates who become preachers, finding faith in the darkest place. Artists who paint murals on prison walls. Fathers who, through letters, try to raise children they will never hold again. Angola is a paradox, a place of brutality and survival, but also of human spirit refusing to vanish. a prison larger than a city, but al-bed. So a graveyard where the system buries men alive. And as the sun sets over the razor wire, and the loudspeaker blares once again, one truth remains unshakable. Angola is not just a prison. It is a world all its own, a world designed to keep men locked inside until their final breath. Inside Angola, violence is not an exception. It is an expectation. For more than a century, the prison has been defined by its reputation as one of the most dangerous correctional facilities in the United States. Though officials have tried to rebrand it, the echoes of its nickname, the bloodiest prison in America, still haunt every cell block. In the mid-20th century, stabbings and beatings were so common that newspapers compared Angola to a battlefield. Former inmates recalled nights where screams echoed through the dormitories, where the weak were preyed upon, and where the guards looked the other way. Even today, decades later, the threat of violence shapes every decision an inmate makes, from where to sit in the cafeteria to who to trust when borrowing a pack of cigarettes. Survival here has rules. Prisoners speak of unwritten codes that dictate behavior. Never owe a debt you can't pay. Never disrespect a man in front of others. Never snitch. And above all, never show fear. In an environment where most men have nothing to lose, even a slight insult can trigger retaliation. One of the darkest realities of Angola's past was sexual violence. For decades, weaker inmates were routinely targeted, often forced into so-called protective relationships with stronger men. Prisoners described it as slavery within slavery, a brutal hierarchy where some men controlled others. Lawsuits and advocacy groups have exposed this horror, pushing the prison to implement reforms, but scars remain. Former inmates have said plainly, "At Angola, if you can't fight, you better find someone to protect you." Adding to this atmosphere are gangs and prison cliques. While Angola does not have the same level of organized gang presence as prisons in California or Texas, groups still form around race, geography, and protection. Friendships forged out of necessity become alliances, and alliances can mean survival, but they can also mean war. A single altercation in the yard can erupt into a chain reaction of violence that leaves multiple men stabbed, beaten, or worse. Guards, too, have been part of Angola's violent history. In 1952, prisoners staged a massive strike, complaining of abuse and starvation. In response, guards armed with shotguns fired into groups of unarmed men, killing at least 5. Decades later, reports continued to emerge of excessive force, beatings, and retaliation against inmates who filed complaints. Federal judges who toured the facility in the 1970s and 80s described conditions as cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Perhaps the most feared punishment at Angola has been solitary confinement. Known locally as the dungeon or closed cell restriction, solitary cells at Angola have been used for decades to control inmates deemed disruptive. Prisoners confined there spend 23 hours a day in isolation, with little more than a steel bed, a toilet, and a slot for food. Some men have spent years in these cells, with devastating psychological effects. One of Angola's most infamous solitary cases was that of the Angola Three, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King. These 3 men, members of the Black Panther Party, were accused of organizing political resistance inside the prison. In the 1970s, Woodfox and Wallace were convicted of murdering a guard under controversial circumstances. They always maintained their innocence, claiming they were targeted because of their activism. All 3 men were held in solitary for decades. Woodfox for an astonishing 43 years, making him the longest solitary confinement prisoner in U.S. history. Courts later found his confinement unconstitutional, and he was eventually released in 2016. His story became a symbol of the psychological torture hidden within Angola's walls. But solitary is not the only punishment. Angola has long used field labor as discipline. Prisoners who disobeyed rules could be sent to the fields under grueling conditions, forced to work from dawn to dusk under armed watch. In the blistering Louisiana summer, with heat often topping 100 degrees, men collapsed from exhaustion. Some never recovered. Violence has not been limited to inmates. Guards, too, have been victims. Over the years, correctional officers at Angola have been stabbed, beaten, and even killed in the line of duty. In such a volatile environment, everyone, prisoner or guard, lives with the knowledge that danger lurks around every corner. And yet, survival at Angola is not just about fighting or toughness. It is also about adaptation. Men learn who to avoid, who to respect, and how to navigate the shifting social landscape. Some turn to religion, seeking peace and faith. Others turn inward, focusing on reading, writing, or art to escape mentally from their confinement. But for many, survival is about endurance, getting through each day, each fight, each season, until time runs out. At Angola, violence is not simply random, it is systemic. It grows from overcrowding, from despair, from a system that locks men away for life and strips them of hope. Critics argue that as long as Angola exists in its current form, violence will remain woven into its DNA. And that violence is not confined to the cell blocks or the fields. It extends into Angola's most chilling institution, the death chamber. Angola houses Louisiana's death row, where men await execution by lethal injection. And for them, survival is not about avoiding stabbings or solitary. It is about fighting the state itself, hoping for appeals, for mercy, for a miracle. But before we step into the death chamber, we need to understand another layer of Angola's control. The strange and unsettling traditions that blur the line between punishment and entertainment, between despair and spectacle. On a crisp October morning, thousands of cars snake down the rural highway leading to Angola. Families, tourists, and locals all gather, eager for an event unlike any other in America. They file past gates and guard towers, and soon the sound of country music, laughter, and rodeo announcers fills the air. But this is no ordinary fairground. This is the Angola Prison Rodeo, a spectacle where convicted men face bulls, broncos, and sometimes death, all for the entertainment of a paying crowd. The rodeo began in 1965, originally as a small event for prison staff and their families. By 1967, it opened to the public, and since then it has grown into the largest prison rodeo in the world. Each fall, thousands of spectators pour into Angola's 10,000-seat arena, built by the prisoners themselves. For $20 a ticket, visitors can watch inmates battle livestock, browse crafts made in prison workshops, and eat food sold by vendors. It feels like a carnival, but one with razor wire on all sides. At the heart of the event are the inmates, many of them serving life sentences. For some, the rodeo offers a rare taste of adrenaline, a break from the monotony of prison life. Inmates sign up voluntarily, knowing full well the risks. They ride broncos, chase bulls, and take part in events designed to maximize danger. One of the most notorious is called convict poker. 4 inmates sit at a card table in the middle of the arena while a bull is released. The last man still seated wins. Another event, Guts and Glory, straps a poker chip to the head of an angry bull, and inmates compete to snatch it. Broken bones, concussions, and even near-death injuries are common. For the prisoners, the rodeo offers more than thrills. It also offers money. Winners can earn small cash prizes, and those who craft items to sell, like leatherwork, paintings, or furniture, may send money back to their families. In a prison where most men make just 2 cents an hour, the rodeo is one of the few ways to earn something meaningful. But critics see it differently. Human rights organizations have called the rodeo a grotesque spectacle that exploits prisoners for profit. They argue that Angola's rodeo mirrors the prison's plantation roots, turning inmate labor and suffering into public entertainment. While free people enjoy the spectacle from the stands, men who will never walk free risk life and limb for a few dollars and fleeting applause. Yet the rodeo is deeply ingrained in Louisiana culture. Families drive for hours to attend. For many locals, it's a tradition passed down through generations. Officials at Angola defend the event as rehabilitation, claiming it gives inmates responsibility, builds confidence, and connects them to the outside world. The rodeo's popularity also brings revenue, millions of dollars over the decades, that funds prison programs, chapels, and rehabilitation projects. Inside the arena, though, the reality is stark. Men who spend most of their lives behind bars suddenly stand in the spotlight, cheered by thousands, only to be sent back to their cages when the dust settles. The contrast is haunting. For a few hours, they are performers, athletes, even celebrities. But when the gates close, they are again prisoners, returning to cells and fields, their cheers replaced by silence. One former inmate described it this way: "For a few minutes you feel human again, but when it's over, you remember where you are. You remember you'll die here." The rodeo embodies Angola's contradictions. It is entertainment and punishment, celebration and exploitation, all rolled into one. It draws in outsiders, who may leave with memories of excitement but little understanding of the suffering behind the scenes. And perhaps that's the deeper purpose. The Angola Rodeo distracts from the grim reality of life inside. It paints a picture of rehabilitation and tradition, while underneath, the same system of forced labor, life sentences, and despair continues unbroken. Because while the public watches bulls and broncos, there are other men inside Angola facing a very different fate. Not a rodeo, not a field shift, but the final punishment the state can deliver: death. Behind a set of locked gates on Angola's grounds lies a place even more feared than the general population: death row. Here, around 60 men live in near total isolation, awaiting the day when the state of Louisiana may end their lives. For these prisoners, Angola is not just a place of confinement. It is the final stop before execution. Death row at Angola is a world of its own. Unlike the open dormitories of the main prison, death-sentenced inmates live in single-man cells, measuring roughly 6 by 9 feet. Inside, there is a steel bunk, a toilet, and little else. For 23 hours a day, these men remain locked inside, with just an hour of recreation time in a small outdoor cage. Conversations are shouted through bars. Contact with others is rare. The monotony is crushing. Inmates describe reading the same books over and over, pacing their cells until their legs ache, and watching the days blur into months, then years. Many of these men have been here for decades, fighting appeals that stretch endlessly through the courts. The uncertainty of when, or if, execution will come hangs over them like a shadow. Executions in Louisiana have long been carried out at Angola. For years, the state used the electric chair, nicknamed Gruesome Gertie. Built in the 1940s, this wooden chair executed dozens of men at Angola, sparking controversy for its botched procedures and the visible agony of prisoners strapped into its seat. Witnesses recalled smoke rising from bodies, flames erupting from heads, and the smell of burning flesh filling the chamber. In 1991, Louisiana officially replaced electrocution with lethal injection. Today, executions take place in a sterile-looking chamber inside the prison. A gurney is positioned in the center of the room, with IV lines waiting to deliver the fatal chemicals. Behind a glass window, a small group of witnesses, journalists, lawyers, family members of the victim, and sometimes family of the condemned, watch the final moments. But executions in Louisiana have grown increasingly rare. Legal battles over the drugs used in lethal injections have stalled the process for years. As of 2025, no execution has taken place in Louisiana since 2010, leaving Angola's death row inmates in a grim limbo. They live with the knowledge that their sentences are written in stone, but the state cannot, or will not, carry them out. For the men here, death row is more than a sentence. It is a mental torture. Every appeal brings hope. Every denial brings despair. Prison chaplains and volunteers sometimes visit, offering prayer or comfort. Inmates cling to religion, to writing, or to memories of life outside. But most know that Angola will be their last address, their final breath taken within its walls. The prison even handles their burials. When a death row inmate dies, whether by natural causes or execution, he is often laid to rest in Point Lookout Cemetery, the prison's graveyard. Coffins are built by fellow inmates in the carpentry shop, and funeral services are conducted inside the prison. Inmates lower the body into the ground while guards look on. Outside the gates, life goes on, but inside Angola, another story ends. The death penalty at Angola reflects larger questions about American justice. Supporters argue it is necessary for the most heinous crimes, a form of ultimate accountability. Opponents call it cruel, pointing to racial disparities, wrongful convictions, and the psychological torment of waiting decades for death that may never come. Angola sits at the center of this debate, its execution chamber both a symbol of final justice and of a system many believe is broken. For the men living in those small, steel-barred cells, the debate is irrelevant. They count days, write letters, and try to endure. They hear the sounds of the prison beyond, the fields, the rodeo, the chapel, but they remain locked in a world where time feels endless, yet every moment is borrowed. Angola is a prison where most inmates serve life. For death row, the sentence is shorter, sharper, and more absolute. But whether by natural death, by lethal injection, or by the slow erosion of years, the end is the same. Angola is where life is taken, whether by force or by time. And beyond death row, the rest of Angola's population faces their own kind of slow execution. Life sentences without parole, where freedom is never coming, and the struggle to survive is measured not in days until release, but in years until death. Angola is more than a prison. It is a mirror of America's darkest history, born on a slave plantation, rebuilt through convict labor, and still standing today as a place where men live and die behind walls most will never escape. For some, Angola is a city of punishment, a necessary fortress to contain those society deems dangerous. For others, it is a living reminder that freedom, justice, and humanity are not shared equally. Inside its 18,000 acres, men plow fields under guard, ride bulls for the amusement of outsiders, pray in prison chapels, and die in hand-built coffins. Angola is not just about crime and punishment. It is about life and death, hope and despair, survival and silence. And as the gates close each night, one question remains. Is Angola a place of justice, or a place where history's chains never truly broke?